Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, it's a 2001 film starring Jake Gyllenhaal as a socially awkward teenager who gets involved in a situation his sheltered upbringing has left him woefully unprepared for. And before you get too excited, it's the other one. This is Bubble Boy. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Bubble Boy, and I put movies in quotes, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
You know, I don't know. I'm feeling a little older this week, but it wasn't my birthday, so what do you think's going on?
I was feeling the same way, and I was trying to figure out what it could be. Then I realized we've got a Blastiversary coming up. Oh, actually, as of the release of this episode, that just passed.
Oh, well, happy Blast Day.
It's our fourth Blastiversary. Happy Blast Day, March 10th.
Congratulations to us. We're 4 years old.
4 years and 146 episodes.
I'm this many.
You really did hold up a hand with fingers up for the listeners.
Our little podcast is growing up, toddling around. Yeah. What is it doing at this age? I don't have kids. Is it going to nursery school already?
Yeah, you're already in pre-K at 4, but you're no longer a toddler. You're just a small person.
Small end of the child spectrum.
Yeah, how you feeling about the show's evolution?
I don't know. It's pretty good. We're in a groove. I feel like we kind of know how to do it now, or at least we know how to do what we know how to do. And I like doing it.
We still start every recording by being like, I think we're going to breeze through this one pretty quick. It's going to be no big deal. And then like 2 hours and 47 minutes later, we're like, fuck, how did we talk about Cloud Atlas for 3 hours?
It's the big lie we tell ourselves every time.
But yeah, that's exciting stuff, man. This was a little mid-COVID project we undertook, and we didn't really know where it would end up. And we're still here doing it.
And thanks to all the listeners who make it worthwhile and keep us motivated to keep going. It's our honor to make these podcasts for you.
And the best gift you can get us for Blastiversary is just tell some friends about the show.
Yeah.
Let's get some more listeners in here.
The more Blastoids, the merrier, I always say.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. You can, oh, no, that comes later.
Okay.
I still have to talk about Bubble Boy. But before we do, Ian, did you happen to watch anything that you wanted to share with the listeners?
I did. I delved back into the archives for some reason. Probably the reason is I was looking to cancel my Paramount Plus subscription, and I wanted to squeeze a little more value out of it before I did. So I watched 2009's Star Trek.
Ooh.
The original J.J. Abrams reboot. I remember liking it quite a bit when it first came out, and it was really fun to go back to it now because it's just chock full of actors who were like pretty new to me then and who I know quite well now. Yeah. Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, all really fun in this.
Don't forget our boy, Anton Yelchin.
Oh, yeah, Yelchin. I mean, there's just so many. It's a laundry list. And one in particular, I forgot how much I liked watching Carl Urban do his full-on Bones McCoy impression, which he just has so much fun with, and so did I. It's kind of a corny movie if you remember it. It feels very Hollywood, but I think as Hollywood movies go, it's a really well-crafted script. Like, it really gets your blood flowing, pulls all the levers. It made me feel a lot of feelings. And I looked it up. It was written by some famous collaborators, Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who co-wrote several other Star Treks and some Transformers movies. And more importantly, we've covered them a bunch right here on the pod. They wrote The Island, they wrote Cowboys and Aliens, and Alex Kurtzman directed the 2017 Mummy, all of which we've covered. And then in looking all this up, which was really interesting, I found some sad news to report, which is that Roberto Orci passed away just a couple weeks ago in February of 2025 at the young age of 51. I just wanted to say rest in peace to one of the most successful big Hollywood screenwriters of the last 20 years.
Yeah, he's done some great work. Obviously, they're not all bangers, but he was a highly successful screenwriter, which is no small thing. Very sad to hear about that. I also learned about it from you right after you learned about it, and pretty sad to hear it. 51 is such a young age to go.
His movies, we don't love all of them, but we found something to like in the ones that we covered. And Star Trek is definitely got to be up near the top of his game. It's worth a rewatch.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on Star Trek a little bit just to say like, hey man, what the hell happened to Eric Bana?
You mean in that movie or since that movie?
Since that movie. Why don't we have more Eric Bana?
I don't know.
It doesn't seem right.
He went back to the Outback. Isn't he in those kind of creepy Aussie indies that you'd like to watch?
Yes, he was in a really good one from a couple of years ago called The Dry, which I think I brought to show and tell.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
That is a solid thriller, but he seemed like he had real star power for a while there and faded a little bit.
Yeah, I'd like to see him in more stuff. Maybe I have to look him up because I bet he's made made a bunch of things that I haven't seen.
Didn't he get his start as like a stand-up comedian? It's always weird when people who aren't comedians, you find out like they've done stand-up, like Zelensky.
Yeah, I think he had one of those image things where he came to Hollywood and got typecast really serious.
That's because he's so handsome.
He is. It's like, wait, I'm also a comedy guy. But that happened with Jackman too, right?
Yeah, but Jackman was more of like a theater guy, I think, before he
Song
got...
and Dance Man, yeah.
He still is, but he's also Wolverine, so he has to be on steroids till he's 90. Poor guy, he's going to die of a heart attack.
I know.
Didn't he come out and say he's going to play Wolverine for another 10 years now?
Oh my God.
What is he doing? He looks so old in Logan, and then like...
There's nothing left inside his body. It's like chicken wire and sticks holding
Lord,
up his
man.
insides. Poor guy.
But speaking of funny, it's not my best segue, but you know what? It's what you got. I went to the movies this week, to the theater,
Oh,
to the cinema, to pay hard-earned American dollars to watch a movie in a movie theater.
nice.
Which is something I don't get to do as often as I like. I love going to the theater, but you know, it's tough. Life's busy. But me and friend of the show, Tim, who I saw Long Legs with over the summer, I guess now have to see every Osgood Perkins movie in the theaters because we went and saw The Monkey.
Nice.
The Monkey is a horror movie that I feel like would be perfect for a gentleman who is maybe a little bit of a scaredy cat, but loves a cool kill.
Ooh.
Do you know anyone like that?
I don't know, but it sounds like a fascinating personality type.
Yes, I'm talking about you, Ian, but also several other of my friends who are like, I don't really do horror, but they're not bothered by blood and guts.
Okay.
Because this movie is a splatter fest, but also incredibly silly with a few moments of like emotional resonance. But I got the sense it was aiming more to make you laugh and make you like cover your eyes from all the insane gore you're seeing. But I had a fucking blast with it. It was a great time. Pretty different tone from the Stephen King short story, which is pretty grim, but stacked cast. The movie starts with an actor who you'll all recognize, but I'm not going to spoil it because he's not in any of the marketing.
Oh, nice.
But he opens the movie with a pretty funny scene. But then you've got people like Theo James, who I always knew was kind of a YA actor, like doing the Divergent movies, I think is where he got his start. But
Okay.
he's playing like a real grown-up adult role. He's playing twins, which is a tough thing for actors to do, but they do feel like distinct personalities and people, which is pretty cool. And then you've got my bae, Tatiana Maslany,
Oh, sure.
fresh off She-Hulk, but more known to me for Orphan Black, which is a really cool show from a few years ago that she plays, again, multiple characters in, or multiple personalities.
Right.
It's all clones and stuff. You saw it, right?
Yeah, I like that show. That was really cool.
Really good show. But like even better than the show is just her performance in it because she's playing all these different roles and you can almost even tell which one she's playing just by like her posture in that show. It's really impressive.
It was an accomplishment for sure.
And even like Elijah Wood popping up in a small role. Like it's just stacked with like little actors that you love and you're like, why isn't that person in more things? And then there they are.
That's a guy that'll add some creep factor to your movie real quick.
Always. I'm loving him in Yellow Jackets this season.
Oh, okay. I didn't know he was in that too.
Even though the season itself is not very good. But it could not be more different from Long Legs, which had a very grim and somber, serious tone. This was made before Long Legs, but I think was shelved for a little bit for whatever reason. But interestingly enough, there is a post-credit scene, so don't get up and leave like everyone else in the theater did. Long Legs shows up. He's putting together a team. No, it's more just like an extended tease for the next Perkins movie, which is already in the bag and coming out in October, I believe.
Oh, neat.
Good time. I don't know how much longer it'll be in theaters, but if you have a chance to go check it out, I recommend it. If not, it could be a very fun, get a few friends together, streaming movie with some beers and some substances. Not the substance, but just other ones.
Yeah, you don't want to overdo it. It's a hat on a hat to consume the substance while watching The Monkey.
Although I feel like The Monkey is not nearly as fucked up as like the last 30 minutes of The Substance, which I haven't even seen yet, but I'm just based on what I've heard. But I think The Substance is also kind of funny from what I've heard.
Yeah, I didn't know that The Monkey was going to be that kind of high-spirited thing. I like the sound of that. I'm definitely open to it. My Stephen King fandom started with, was it Night Shift? One of those early collections of short stories, and I'm still like a horror short story fan.
Bag of Bones, right? That was one of them.
Yeah, I think I got through all of them eventually. I don't remember which one had the monkey in it, but I love that as a starting point for this, and I love that it's a little more puckish than somber.
And the monkey animatronic that they built for the movie is stellar.
Oh, nice.
Super creepy. It's got a lot of character.
Cool.
I will not be buying, if they release a version of it for consumer purchase, I will not be buying one because I don't want that fucking thing in my house.
You don't want your kids winding it up and leaving it on your nightstand?
Correct. It's never the person who turns the key. They always
Ooh.
survive. But all right, time to break out of our bubble. Talk about Bubble Boy.
Yeah.
I did mention that this was a movie I had some fondness for. It came out when I was in my early teens, 13, 14, something like that.
That's good timing for this movie.
It's maybe the only timing that would work. And I think seeing it that age gave me some goodwill towards it. So I do remember watching it a couple times as like an older teenager and still enjoying it. Did you know this movie existed? Do you remember it coming out at all?
No, I'm fairly proud to say that I had zero awareness of this movie. And I think I said this before, when you you brought up the title Bubble Boy, I was like, what is that? Is that some dumb Sandler movie? And I was half right.
Kinda.
Dumb movie. They could have swapped out Sandler in that role at some point in his career.
Yeah, younger, but
yeah.
Would have been a different movie, though, because Gyllenhaal is charming and there is an innocence about him that Sandler lacks.
Yeah. Gyllenhaal kind of saves the movie. He and Marley Shelton, who plays his love interest.
Let's be clear, nobody saves the movie, but they try. They get the closest of anything.
They save you from shutting it off and throwing it in the trash. Like, it's not the most despicable movie we've seen, but it's pretty trying on your patience. And if it wasn't for those two having some likability, putting some humanity into these really stock, grossly overblown characters, you wouldn't have anything to hang on to.
Yeah, we'll get more into the specifics of what it is we really dislike about this movie, but I would just wanted to throw out there that I really would have paid good money for like 2011, 2012 Gyllenhaal to be on Inside the Actor Studio and James Lipton just be like, tell me about Bubble Boy. Because I don't think he likes talking about this movie very much.
Going in, I wasn't sure exactly where this fit into his career, and I was like, oh, he risked his reputation on this movie. I think that's why he would dislike it looking backwards at it, because like, I just took a huge risk of becoming a guy who plays really cheap, dumb characters in bad comedies. It could have derailed him from becoming a serious actor that he luckily became.
Yeah, I think he was at a stage of his career where he's just like, I can be a star of a movie, even if it's not necessarily the best movie. That's something. But the movie is littered with pretty decent sized actors now who were just getting their start in these kind of very silly, a lot of them very small roles. And we'll shout them out as they come up throughout the story. But it is interesting the place Hollywood was in this movie where, like, spoiler alert, Ray Merriman himself, Pablo Schreider, is a kind of goofball member of a very silly cult who has zero lines, I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, I think he may sing on screen.
I was like, is that Pablo Schreider? I had to look it up. I was like, oh shit, it is. Ray Merriman, folks, like Nick Sabatka for the old heads.
Okay.
Or Porn Stash for the Orange is the New Black fans.
Oh, wow. You got the whole
I'm a Pablo Schreider head.
Yeah.
What can I say? He's my favorite Schreider brother. But that's weird. He's just, This was his film debut, was just a nameless, they're all nameless because they all have the same name, but like lineless extra.
He's very young. He plays a smiling, grinning, happy face kid, tall and skinny, not yet yoked at that age.
He hadn't started the Hugh Jackman diet.
Yeah.
It's normal for everyone to get more muscular in their 50s, right? That's what happens.
Man, I'm waiting for it to happen to me.
Well, I think Pablo Schreider's like late 40s, so he's not quite there yet. But there is a lot of that, like faces you recognize. You're like, what are they doing here?
It's got a big cast. It's got this plot where it creates all these factions going on a cross-country chase. So there's a full motorcycle gang. There's a full gang of circus performers. And not everybody has lines or more than one line, but they had to fill it with people. And there's a lot of sort of semi-familiar comedy faces in the tiny roles.
Yes. But then there's other roles. There are times where you're like, what is that person doing in here? Because you're like, they're a big name and they should be in a bigger role. And then there's other times where you're like, what is this person doing here? Because you're like, how did an actor this bad get cast in a movie and get lines? Looking at you, Mark Sheridan. But before we get too deep into the individual quibbles and qualms we have with Bubble Boy, do you want me to talk a little bit about the story behind the movie?
Yeah, please. Let's hear how this thing happened.
The early 2000s were a golden age for raunchy teen comedies. American Pie had made a fortune, Road Trip was a hit, and studios were scrambling to find the next big, absurd coming-of-age movie. Enter Bubble Boy, a movie that asked the question, what if a boy with a life-threatening immune disorder went on a wacky road trip in a giant plastic ball? The answer? A box office disaster, a critical punching bag, and a film that even its own writers later tried to redeem with a musical adaptation.
Makes you think they're not that great at writing or redemption.
The project began as the feature film debut of screenwriters Cinco Paul and Ken Dorio, who would later become the minds behind Despicable Me and The Secret Life of Pets. Their original script was a dark comedy, reportedly more in line with Donnie Darko than Dude, Where's My Car, but studio interference reshaped it into a broader, sillier teen flick. Director Blair Hayes, making his first and nearly last feature film, was tasked with bringing it to life, while 20-year-old Jake Gyllenhaal, fresh off October Sky and about to break out in Donnie Darko, was cast as the titular Bubble Boy. Filming was chaotic, but at least Gyllenhaal had fun. The bubble suit was specifically designed to make him fall over, and the tumbles he took weren't scripted, just an accidental bonus.
Have a nice trip. See you next bomb.
Danny Trejo also loved his role, largely because it was one of the few times he didn't have to kill anyone, or get killed himself. However, the movie quickly became the center of controversy. The film's comedic take on a boy living in a bubble drew backlash for downplaying the effects of severe combined immunodeficiency, better known as SCID, a real condition that had claimed the life of David Vetter, who lived in a similar suit and died at age 12. The backlash didn't help the already troubled production, and it seemed like Bubble Boy was rolling toward disaster before it even hit theaters. And then it flopped. Hard.
It dropped, it flopped, and the bubble popped.
Released on August 24th, 2001, Bubble Boy opened in 13th place with just $2 million, getting crushed by new releases like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Ghosts of Mars, while holdovers American Pie 2 and Rush Hour 2 dominated the box office. By its second weekend, it dropped a staggering 54%, making just $945,000. By week 3, it was in 31st place with just $190,000. By the time it rolled out of theaters, it had grossed just $5 million against its $13 million budget, with marketing expenses pushing its losses even higher.
Not to mention what they spent on Windex.
Critically, it didn't fare much better. The film holds a 31% on Rotten Tomatoes, with most critics panning its crude humor and bizarre tone. Even Gyllenhaal later admitted the original vision had been completely lost in the studio's attempt to turn it into a goofy, lowbrow comedy. In an attempt to salvage their work, Paul and Dario revisited Bubble Boy in 2013, not as another film, as a musical. They wrote the music, lyrics, and book themselves, hoping to restore the dark oddball charm they had originally intended.
Well, it does make them seem like a couple of dark oddballs.
The show was well received, but it did little to change the movie's reputation. As for the people involved, Gyllenhaal rebounded quickly, starring in Donnie Darko later that year before becoming a full-fledged leading man. Swoosie Kurtz and Marley Shelton continued working steadily, and Danny Trejo went on to play roughly 800 more roles. Director Blair Hayes, however, largely faded from Hollywood, directing a handful of TV movies before disappearing completely by 2019. In the end, Bubble Boy became a strange footnote in early 2000s teen comedy history. Too weird for the mainstream, too watered down to be truly subversive. It was a movie that rolled into theaters and immediately rolled right back out, leaving behind only a few fond memories, a handful of unintended laughs, and a musical trying to correct its mistakes.
Well, that's a good idea to put out a musical. Everybody knows no one ever criticizes the makers of a musical.
Hello, very nice to meet you. I'd like to know about sex change operation. I see.
Correct. Yeah. I just want to say Cinco Paul is a very cool name. That sounds like a character from a Quentin Tarantino movie.
It does. Maybe I'm disposed to not like Cinco Paul because of this movie, and I'm like, that sounds like a stupid name. But, I try not to insult people's names, whether they were named that at birth or made it up themselves.
He's actually the adopted brother of former Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie guitarist John Five, but he is originally from Mexico, so they called him Cinco Paul.
I see what you did there.
That was a walk around the fucking block for that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, the less I know about Cinco Paul, probably the better.
Him and Dario are both also members of the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, which I think explains their objections to this movie. You could draw a decent amount of parallels between the bright and shiny cult and the Mormons, and the movie's whole take on religion is weird.
It's funny. You just were talking about the lighthearted way it treated this serious immune deficiency condition, got people all up in arms about it before it even came out. And I'm like, hold on, you haven't seen the movie. There's like 10 other things.
Right. That's the least of your concerns.
Wait till you see what else they made fun of. It's one of those movies where you feel the writers, whether that was in the original or in the rewrites, going, who else can we offend? Let's make this equal opportunity and let's have fun with it and let's be edgy. And honestly, most of it is just uncomfortable.
Very much so. I made this comment off mic, but it feels like a comedy written by people that don't understand comedy, in the sense that they're like, it's a joke, right? Because like this guy's Hindu. He likes cows. He thinks they're sacred. Isn't that dumb? Shouldn't we be mean to him because of that? And you're like, no, that's not comedy. That's just racism.
And I think they understood comedy enough to go, but we're going to make that character dignified. He's superior to everyone around him, but actually he's super chill.
They did name him Push Pop.
Yeah, he's Indian, but he's actually super cool, dude. I have an Indian friend. Like that. It's that's as deep as the movie goes, where like, oh, he's actually wiser and more spiritual than everyone else and takes the high road, which is like, okay, at least they did that, but it does not balance out. It's still uncomfortable. Large sections of the movie are uncomfortable. You and I both said like the beginning and the end, where it's more about
Jimmy and Chloe. Yeah.
Jimmy and Chloe, Jake and Marley's relationship are the likable parts. And then in the middle, you're gritting your teeth through quite a bit.
Yeah. I noticed that much more on my rewatch. I was kind of on board for a decent amount of the first portion of the movie.
Yeah.
I think when the cult shows up is when it goes off the rails for me. Then the middle of the movie is just getting worse and worse as it goes on.
Yeah. The fact that the movie can lose you making fun of such an easy target as a ridiculous singing, dancing space alien cult because it goes after them too cheaply. You're like, oh, I don't buy that. What's wrong with the cultists? Like it has you feeling that way. And then you're like, oh, the movie's losing me fast.
Hey, if it's good enough for Pablo Schreider, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, both Cinco Paul and Ken Dario played Todds.
Oh.
They were extras in the cult.
Okay.
So I guess they were on board with the whole making fun of the cult.
They couldn't have been too distanced from it to put their fun cameos in. I had the same thing. I always warm up to movies on second watch, and I did warm up to the first part, which I found offensive the first time just because of having to see Jake Gyllenhaal's haircut and all that stuff.
God, I hate that haircut so much.
By the time you've seen the movie once, it's moved the Overton window on you. So the middle is so offensive that by comparison, the crude stuff in the early parts seems tame. You're like, oh, they're just dunking on Christians unnecessarily and making fun of developmentally disabled people in an oblique way that feels icky. But like that seems...
It's tame in comparison.
That seems tame and like acceptable by the time you've watched the whole movie once. It's not as gross as It's My Boy because it doesn't lean into wanting to offend you so much.
It happens incidentally mostly, I think.
I think the spirit is, give us a chance. It's just a goofy comedy and we're taking shots at everybody and we're going easy. We're not heavy-handed, but it's wearisome. It wears on you.
Yeah, I think the ickiness just comes from how many marginalized groups are the butt of these jokes. It's not like you're making fun of individuals. You're making fun of people with conditions or beliefs. And like the characters themselves are more just like proxies for these ideas.
Yeah. And it does the quote unquote right thing where it makes the strange circus performers into noble heroes and it makes the biker gang who look like scary thugs, it makes them good-hearted and lovable. At the same time, you're laughing at them for the way they look. These people with these, what you assume are some kind of birth defects or deformities or whatever you would call them. They're totally over the top, not real. None of it's grounded. It's totally fake, but it's such cheap shots and it's not fun to laugh at the Lobster Boy or the Chicken Man because it's just icky.
It is icky. And also, I think both those characters are played by people who weren't born with those deformities. Is deformities the acceptable nomenclature?
I don't know. I don't have good terminology that doesn't sound problematic in itself, so it's hard to talk about.
So some of the circus performers, like Clark and Beetlejuice, who I think is just named Beetlejuice in this movie, were clearly born that way. And some are using prosthetics. Oh no, Beetlejuice is Lil Zip. Sorry.
Okay.
And Matthew McGrory is the human Sasquatch, aka Clark. Yeah, so those guys were born with that. So it feels a little less exploitative to have them in a movie than it is to cast people and put them in prosthetics to make them look like circus performers.
That's a good point. They at least consented to participate in the comedy and they have a right to do that.
Right. They have some agency there, whereas Lobster Boy, I don't even know if that's his name. Is he Flipper Boy or something? Yeah. He's not really a lobster, more of a dolphin boy.
My apologies.
To the dolphin community and or the lobster community.
Oh, God. See what this movie drags us into?
Yeah. Why don't we just start talking about the story, man? We could do this all day.
Okay. Here we go. Jimmy Livingston, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, was born without an immune system, so he lives in a plastic bubble inside his Southern California house, and he never, ever goes outside. Even given Jimmy's precarious health situation, his overbearing mom, Mrs. Livingston, played by Swoosie Kurtz, seems wildly overprotective. Meanwhile, his dad, played by Carroll Lynch, never says anything. Now a teenager, Jimmy pines for the cute girl named Chloe, played by Marley Shelton, who lives next door. Chloe sees Jimmy in the window and decides to go inside to meet him. The two become best friends, and the seeds of love start to take root. But despite Jimmy's yearnings, their relationship remains platonic. Even one night when Jimmy's forced to rebuff Chloe's drunken advances out of fear for his safety. Meanwhile, throughout high school, Chloe has been dating a jerk named Mark. After graduation, Chloe informs Jimmy she's accepted Mark's proposal and she's leaving for Niagara Falls, where they'll get married in 3 days' time. That night, the agonized Jimmy hatches a plan. He builds himself a personal bubble with just his legs sticking out, leaves the family home without telling his parents, and sets out to stop Chloe's wedding and to tell her he loves her.
Pretty decent premise, except for I certainly understand the people who felt a certain way about the whole bubble conceit and whether or not it was insensitive. But like forbidden love, we know we're meant to be together, but we can't because of circumstances. Like could just be The Notebook. Like that's tried and true.
Yeah, it's not hard given the likability of the actors when it's a cute girl who connects with the boy who has no friends. That kind of tugs on your heart. You're like, oh my God, this poor kid who has all this stuff in life going against him has found a great girl and they have this cool relationship, and the way they show them connecting, doing holidays together. They do this whole trick-or-treating thing where she's a mermaid and he's a fish in a tank. They do all these cute things in this big montage.
And they bring kids up to like you also see how she integrates him into society in a way he never had been before.
It's really neat. It's endearing. That whole sequence, despite the fact that like Swoosie Kurtz, who's a great actor, is super annoying when she's supposed to be. She's the world's most overbearing mom and most stereotypical in blunt, dumb ways. But that's the part, like I got got over that stuff in the second watch and really sort of enjoyed the love story.
I think the problem with Swoosie Kurtz as, I don't know, did she even get a name?
She's Mrs. Livingston in a lot of it. I think maybe
No, she's just Mrs. Livingston in the credits.
Oh, okay.
They did a thing that I'm struggling to think of another example of it, but I know I've said it on the pod before, where like they wrote a character that was supposed to be hateable and made her, they went too far.
Okay.
To the point where it's not even enjoyable to like watch her. She's not a character you love to hate. She's just a character you hate. And a lot of the movie hinges on her. She's maybe the co-lead. She's in a lot of this movie.
Yeah.
And I found myself just counting the minutes till she was off screen. And that's no knock on her because I've enjoyed her in lots of other stuff. She was really good in a small arc on Lost. She's an actor I have a lot of respect for, but I don't know. You got to give her something to make her like tolerable.
I think the thing that didn't happen was there wasn't a moment of humanity for her where you go, oh yeah, she's insane. She's over neurotic about protecting her kid, but you get it because she loves him. She never lets the mask down. So it's all harsh stuff from her. Even when you think she's being loving, something unpleasant happens, right?
Right.
You don't find a reason to sympathize with her.
No, and there's no explanation for why she is the way she is. There's no backstory about something that happened to her in her life where now she's like, we do get backstory about her, but if anything, it makes the way she is now more implausible.
Yeah, there's an interesting twist, which we can wait to reveal until we say it later in 20 minutes, but it doesn't cohere into a full logic about why her character is like that. The logic that you get on the surface is that, oh, they're conservatives and they're very faithful Christians, right? But they just use that as a bludgeon to be like, oh yeah, they got a shrine to Ronald Reagan on the wall, and she makes him eat cross-shaped cookies as the only thing he can eat is her little like
Fiber cookies.
fiber cookies. Yeah, all of it's harsh. It's like, give her a break.
I mean, let's not mince words. What she's doing is abuse, textbook abuse, Munchausen syndrome, emotional, all the abuses, even physical. She's locked him in a bubble. She's confined him for no good reason. Spoiler alert. Like, it's supposed to be like a nice moment when we find out that he's fine, but then like the horror of what that means is, and obviously we suspect that much earlier.
And we're saying they didn't plant that seed, so he immediately forgives her and says, I love you, Mom, which we're talking about at the very end
I wasn't on board with.
Of the movie now. Yeah, and the movie didn't give us a reason to really be on board, unfortunately.
And I know it's a dumb comedy, but you still have to justify the choices you make.
It feels like the kind of thing that only usually gets one small scene in the movie, and you go, oh, we edited out that scene because it wasn't punchy and funny enough, and we were going for more crude gags.
They didn't want to make the movie too long. They were like, if we add that scene, it's going to be 83 minutes instead of 82, and that's just too...
I don't know.
Do we have to put an intermission in at that point? Like 82 minutes, geez.
That's speculation on our part, but didn't you also dig up some stuff that they tried to take away the dad's redeeming speech towards the end?
Yeah, it's IMDb trivia, so take it with a grain of salt.
Okay.
But John Carroll Lynch plays Mort. He actually gets a name. Mort Livingston, and we love John Carroll Lynch on the show.
We do.
One of the creepiest dudes in the world, and I mean that with all the affection. But yeah, he never says a word. There are times when he looks like he's about to, and he gets shushed by Swoosie Kurtz or Vern Troyer at some point is just like cutting him off when he tries to talk. And he finally gets a big speech to Jimmy. It's not a big speech. It's only like 15 words, but it's poignant and it motivates Jimmy to continue on his journey. And the rumor is that they wanted to take that away.
Yeah.
They wanted to cut that big speech. And John Carroll Lynch was like, no, the character doesn't work without it.
Exactly. And because I was coming into this a John Carroll Lynch fan, and I was also annoyed with the dad for most of the movie, but because they gave him one moment where you're like, oh, the dad's a good guy. He gets to show that he really loves his kid. That sort of undoes all that annoyance that had built up with me. And so that tells me like, that's all it might have taken to help you feel similarly about the mom. And the idea that maybe they were thinking to cut that out makes you think that they just didn't care about whether you liked the mom or dad, which is not great. This movie needed a little more reason to care about the characters.
Yeah, it's got a decent emotional core at the main romance, like we said, but it needs more on the edges of that. Now, I know we've been talking about Act 1 for a while, but there are a couple more things I have to get to before we move on. And first up, I may have made reference to a couple actors that have sizable roles in this movie, and maybe they shouldn't. And one of them is Dave Sheridan as Mark, and he is dollar store Sean William Scott, but not even like a chain dollar store like Dollar General.
He's definitely that, and he's also garage sale Jim Carrey. Like, he makes some faces in some of his scenes. He's mugging in a Carrey-esque way to me, but he was way cheaper in the budget, I'm sure, than even Sean William Scott in those days, who was in his prime making this kind of movie, teen sex romps.
Never mind the fact this movie came out a week after American Pie 2. What the fuck are you doing? What do you think your audience is going to if they have the choice? But that's neither here nor there. We'll get into that later. So I knew Dave Sheridan, not his name necessarily, but I knew his face. I was like, I know that guy. So I did the digging, and he was Officer Doofy in Scary Movie. And if you can't tell by the name, he is a play on Officer Dewey, played by David Arquette in the Scream series. who Dewey is meant to be like a simple dude in the Scream movies, certainly in the first one. So they take that joke and just dial it up to 15, where Officer Doofy is like not a functioning adult. Like he can't look after himself. And I remember being like, that wasn't a bad performance.
Oh, really? I didn't expect you to say that sentence.
But now I'm a little worried about Dave Sheridan because I'm like, is he just like that? Did he know he was giving a performance as Officer Doofy? And that feels mean-spirited to say. I have nothing I don't know that Dave Sheridan's a bad guy, but he's certainly a bad actor.
We hate to beat up on actors, but it's such a stereotypical douchey high school bro role, and it's not executed with any finesse, neither in the script nor in the performance. Sorry, Dave Sheridan.
I do love that his IMDb photo, though, is clearly from this movie because he's got like a perm mullet.
Yeah.
is the best way I could describe it, which is his hairstyle for most of this movie.
For most of the, into the end when he gets 90s frosted tips to show that time has passed since high school.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about is a complaint. The first time I was watching this movie for the pod, I texted you about this immediately. And it is because the soundtrack of this movie is so fucking obnoxious. And I don't mean the songs they choose. They choose songs that work just fine for this movie. Like even like better than fine. Like a lot of these songs are pitch perfect for this movie. Like Damn It by Blink-182 is featured heavily. Was that Ween that sings Bad Day?
I don't know.
I don't know how to Google Bad Day song. That's just going to come up with that fucking one-hit wonder from the early aughts.
Oh, you had a bad day. It's not that one.
It's like having a bad day. Stay out of my way, right? Maybe if I Google the lyrics, it'll come up. Blue Flannel. That sounds like a made up band. But like what the movie does with these songs is pick on one lyric and just loop it.
Yeah.
It's there's no section of the song Damn It by Blink-182, which by the way is like a 2.5 minute song where Mark Hoppus sings I Guess This Is Growing Up like 40 fucking times in a row.
Over and over.
This movie decided to just take the 8 bars where he does sing that line a few times and loop it. Like they play no other part of the song until the very end of the movie.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
They loop it in a way where it happens so many times. You get it, where a movie doesn't edit to like hammer home a point. It happened like 2 or even 3 times and it's like the button of a scene, you're like, okay, they're playing it because that's the line they wanted to go out on. But then it just keeps going. And you're like, what world is this where this song repeats in this bizarro way with the singer just saying the same thing over and over?
It doesn't.
This Bubble Boy walks down a dusty highway.
Tidbit, that's the first song I learned how to play on the bass.
Oh, okay.
It was Damn It by Blink-182.
I assume you learned 2 measures of it, then you just repeated them over and over.
I mean, to be fair, because it's not a very hard song to play.
Okay.
That's why it was my first song.
Yeah, catchy.
Good song, though. Not the version in this movie. And I suspect I would hate that Bad Day song, no matter how much of it I heard.
Yeah, that was annoying from the get-go. The movie is trying, it's trying to ride that teen sex comedy craze. And so it's trying to plug in something that the teens will like. This is their kind of music. They love this shit. And then it just does that, like it does a comedy in a very heavy-handed way.
Yeah, the rise of Blink-182 very closely coincided with the re-emergence of the teen sex comedies because like they were featured on a lot of those soundtracks. They were also characters in American Pie.
Okay, I didn't even remember that.
They were briefly featured.
But it makes sense. It does seem to all go together in my cultural memory.
So it feels like the filmmaker is like holding up a big neon sign. Like, look, we're like those movies, right? Like we can do it too, but like they fuck it up still.
We got the guys you like. Look.
They managed to fuck that up too. All right, that's what I've got for Act 1. Did you have anything additional or should we move on to Act 2?
Let's move on down the road.
First, Jimmy tries to catch a bus to Niagara Falls, but the grumpy bus stop attendant, played by Zach Galifianakis, informs him he doesn't have enough money. Then Jimmy is picked up by a bus full of singing zealots called Bright and Shiny, but he soon realizes they're a cult, and they dump him off the bus. Later, the cultists are told their messiah is, quote, the round one, and they set off to recapture Jimmy. Meanwhile, Jimmy has befriended a tough-looking biker named Slim, played by Danny Trejo, who gives him a ride and explains the name tattooed across his stomach. It's the lost love of his life, a woman named Wildfire. Slim takes Jimmy as far as Las Vegas before Slim gets caught up gambling to try to win more gas money. Heading out of town on a scooter, Jimmy runs across his parents, who've been desperately searching for him. They end up running off the road, and Jimmy's bubble bounces into a moving train car. The boxcar belongs to Dr. Freak, played by Vern Troyer, who tries to recruit Jimmy for his circus sideshow. Jimmy rebuffs Dr. Freak and escapes, freeing the other performers who begin following him too. Also following in his wake and clashing with each other are the cultists, Slim's biker gang, and Jimmy's parents, who have picked up Dr. Freak, mistaking him for a lost child. Next, Jimmy befriends an Indian man named Push Pop, who agrees to drive him to Niagara Falls in his ice cream truck. But Push Pop accidentally runs over a cow and has to stop his truck. Jimmy continues on foot until he reaches a small town in Illinois, where an elderly cab driver named Pappy says he'll take Jimmy to Niagara for $500. So Jimmy goes next door to a bar and earns the money by winning a mud wrestling contest. But when he comes out, he's surrounded by all his various pursuers. While the cultists, circus performers, and bikers have a massive brawl, Jimmy sneaks off and leaves town in Pappy's taxi.
I'm so sorry you had to read Act 2.
That's a tough one.
Even the summary is cringy.
It's not great. This is the worst act of the movie by far.
Yeah.
And like, even as I was reading the synopsis, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't make a note about that, but that sucks. There's so much bad stuff in this section of the movie that it's hard to keep track of it all.
Yeah.
But there are highlights too, so we don't want to be all negative. I just can't remember what any of them are right now.
You like Zach Galifianakis, who has a very small role at the beginning of this section.
Yes, it's kind of the blueprint for his comedic character pre The Hangover, which was very like low energy, deadpan, mean, sarcastic. And then he went a little more zany when The Hangover came out. That was just how the character was written, and he played it so well that it became his calling card. But I was a big stand-up fan as a teenager, and I think I knew of him before this. And so I was familiar with his type of comedy. So it was cool to see him in the movie. And I think his part works for the most part. He's very dry.
He's very good at staying extremely serious in funny scenes. And yeah, I saw that in his early stand-up too. It's a good bit. I don't know. I felt favorably towards Zach Galifianakis in the scene, but the way he bounced off of the Jimmy character, who is so like
Earnest and goofy.
over the top, naive, earnest, goofy. Somehow like it wasn't as fun. It wasn't quite the right match of tones or something.
Yeah, they do feel like they're in different movies maybe to some extent.
Yeah.
But the incongruity, I think, was the point, but it doesn't mean it works.
Yeah, it's like because Galifianakis plays that character overly serious and off-putting, you kind of want him to face off against a normal guy or gal so they can go, what's going on here? Who did I just run into? But when he goes up against another weirdo, now it's the two weirdo scene, and you should have stuck to one unusual thing.
I don't know. You're not going to talk me out of liking Zach in this one because
Okay.
when Jimmy gets hit by the bus and his bubble bounces onto, he's like, that area is only for loading and offloading.
Yeah.
It's so deadpan. I was like, or even like when he puts 80 cents on the counter, it's like, how far will this get me? Take a step back. That far.
Yeah.
And then I think it does go on a little too long, but maybe it's only by comparison because I don't find anything funny. Scratch that. I find one thing funny about Bright and Shiny.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a very well. First of all, I find the term Bright and Shiny a stupid thing to name a cult or have be your basis, and they just sing it repeatedly. So I'm already predisposed to disliking them because I just think that's lazy writing to like, that's what you're going to call it. You know, like it feels like a placeholder for another idea that was supposed to come later and never did.
That's a good way to imagine it. They sing the song that's very like 60s hippie, but they're more contemporary because they wear ringer t-shirts with logos.
Yeah, and they're like doomsday-ish. The one thing I do find funny about them is that their leader is Fabio.
Yeah, that was a fun. It's another one of those 90s, early 2000 cameos like Vern Troyer or small parts where you're trying to get a laugh by just.
Don't call them mini parts. They're small parts.
I would never.
He's not mini.
But yeah, he is funny. And he has to give like a fairly sincere speech. So it's just interesting. You're like, oh, Fabio's trying to talk.
He's acting.
It's an interesting curiosity. I'll give him that.
You've seen the pictures of him on the roller coaster, right? When the bird fucking flew into his face.
Oh, I had forgotten that. There's some paparazzi shots of him with a bloody face.
Yeah. The only things I know Fabio for are those photos, this movie, and the cover of Danielle Steele novels.
Those are the highlights.
Is there more to it? I don't know. Who's to say? Not me.
Some mysteries are best left unsolved, really.
True. And then we get to Slim. I thought it was cute that Danny Trejo was like, I like that role because I didn't have to kill anyone. And I was like, that's sweet. I also like that he has multiple tattoos of women. So he's Danielle or whatever. But apparently those two tattoos are real. And that's his wife and his daughter.
Oh, wow.
They added the wildfire one.
That's fun. Okay. So yeah, the two women are crossed out and Jimmy takes 3 guesses to figure out which love of his life he's talking about, which is a good bit in itself. Danny Trejo is like the next most human character. Like he has charm, he has heart besides our male and female leads. He's the guy that you're like okay with coming back on screen and saying some lines because it's almost always charming.
Yeah, because he is playing a member of a biker gang and clearly like a tough guy because it's Danny Trejo. But he also feels like a real person to some degree because he's not all tough all the time. Like he has a nice side. He just feels like a more fleshed out character and also not like obnoxious the way a lot of other characters are.
Yeah. He plays it really like I don't think of him as ever having to do very complicated acting in the kind of roles that he's known for. And his acting is not complicated here, but it's just likable. It's like, oh, that was a good performance. He just nailed it. I'm
going to be brave. I'm going to tell the people. My favorite joke from this movie for many years was when Danny Trejo says to Jimmy's telling him about the love of my life is marrying this other guy. And Slim goes, oh, so I'm not going to do the voice. That's the bridge too far. But he says, oh, you're going to cut a vato, eh? And Jimmy says, I was not planning on cutting a vato. Like the joke is that Jimmy doesn't have a Spanish accent to say these words. That's the joke. That's all of it. That's everything.
Yeah, but that's not bad.
I laugh at it every time. I don't know why. It's dumb.
Jake Gyllenhaal actually pulls off some of the see some of the comedy that might have fallen flat if not for his efforts. I give him props throughout this movie for making it work as much as it can.
I mean, he's clearly a funny guy. Both of them are, but I'm talking Gyllenhaal specifically, even though he's a serious actor with a capital A nowadays, but he can still be funny from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. Should we try to plow through the non-funny parts? We already talked about the circus performers and Push Pop, the Indian ice cream truck driver.
Yeah, I guess we don't have to spend too much time on it because we already did talk about it. The Dr. Freak character, though, I did want to shout out. Another way the movie is trying to be cute is when Jimmy calls him Minnie, which my problem with that is it's not a thing a human would say.
Right.
You're so mini is not a sentence that makes sense. You'd say you're
true.
So little, you're so small. But he says you're so mini because, of course, Vern Troyer was mini-me.
Right.
And then it gives Vern Troyer's character a reason to beat Jimmy with a stick while screaming, "Don't call me Minnie. I'm not Minnie." It's bad writing. It's stupid. And I hate it. That's what I got for that. And then Push Pop. But I don't mean to bulldoze you.
No. Let's go around the room and say something you hate about each of these characters.
And then Push Pop, I already talked about how stupid it is that his character arc is trying to be a good person. And instead he commits what he thinks is like some of the highest sacrilege he possibly could. And that's supposed to be the gag. But I will say, I know you didn't like them. The bigoted rednecks that are harassing him when Jimmy first meets him. One of them is giving such a unique performance that I couldn't help but be in awe of him. The guy who says he's got immunities.
Yeah, is that the sheriff guy with the hat on, trooper hat on?
He drove to work that day like, I'm gonna show them. This is going on my reel because he's really going for it. And I think it works.
I have to admit, I did laugh at that. There are some points in this movie where I begrudgingly laughed at things. That was one of them. And it stuck out in the scene. The rest of it was like aggressively unfunny. Like they set up this scenario where this Indian man's eating in a small town cafe and he's surrounded by the cheapest set of redneck yokel impressions by a group of comedy actors you could ever pull together. Like they're so loud and over the top. It's not grounded in anything. It's like, what is this world we're in where it's just guys with camouflage hunting caps just shouting stuff in bad Southern accents?
They're in the desert. Why are they wearing camouflage? Like forest camouflage. It's not even desert camouflage.
I think that's more of a production qualm with the movie. Like he starts out in Palmdale, which is in the high desert outside of LA.
Oh, is that a real place? I wasn't sure if it was like a made up town.
Yeah, no, that's the real thing. And a lot of the movie looks like it was filmed there, even when they're like, okay, now that we're in Nebraska, now we're in Illinois, and it still looks like the high desert.
I did have that thought when he finally gets to New York. I was like, wait, he was all the way. Was he just in Ohio? Because I guess you would go through Ohio. In Illinois to get. I was like, that all looked like the desert.
Yeah, they don't spend a lot of energy on that.
Is it as suburban as Bubble Boy makes it seem?
Yeah, parts of it are. It's one of those communities that's an incredibly painful, long drive, but it's a place that people actually commute to LA jobs from because you could afford a house out there.
Yeah, as a New York native, we have many of those. They're called New Jersey and Connecticut.
Yeah, it's definitely more in the New Jersey, at least in the stereotypical concept of that, versus like Connecticut being like the upscale bedroom communities. I think Palmdale, Lancaster is not that. It's the cheap, affordable housing.
Only until you get to Fairfield. After that, that's where the wealth of Connecticut fades.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, production design's bad too. Fuck them.
It's cheap. They take some shortcuts, but what the fuck?
Mud wrestling in a bar is such a movie trope. But has that ever happened in real life?
I don't know.
You've never witnessed it, right? I've never witnessed it. I spent a lot of time in bars.
I mean, you're asking me as a guy who grew up in an earlier era when maybe that was possible.
You grew up in like the Animal House days. Like that seems like a thing that would have happened.
Probably happened while I was still a little too young to be going to bars, but I feel like that's maybe like a 80s thing.
Definitely feels like an anachronism in most movies that include it now. Like even 2001 is way too recent for it to be here.
Yeah.
But it does bring us the other thing that I have too.
Another racially insensitive gag taken to an extreme, so much so that
it circles back around. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a thing we both laughed at and we both felt shitty about laughing at.
What's the guy's name? Who is the character? Oh, so he's just MC. The actor's name is Ping. That's why I had that in the back of my mind.
Ping Wu, the MC at the bar.
So he asks, once again, I will not do the voice, but Jimmy needs $500 to drive to Niagara Falls. Wouldn't you know it? This bar is giving out a $500 prize. Jimmy says, I would like $500. And Ping repeats $500. And Jimmy repeats $500. And Ping repeats $500. And Jimmy repeats $500. And we do this for a while, but with each of them getting more shrill and excited with each repetition of $500, that by the end of it, I was just like, I was smiling. Couldn't help it.
They're screaming it.
They're both making some wild faces.
Their faces, especially Jake's face, because it goes on longer than you think. And you think you've seen Jake make the biggest, craziest screaming face. And then there's one more round and it comes back to him and his face is more crazy. And I'm like, dude, fucking A. I laughed. I felt bad.
He's a good actor, even in bad things.
Yeah.
He can do it all. And then we have Pappy does die in this act, right? Yeah.
He goes into a death-like state.
Right, but doesn't actually die.
But Pappy and Pippi survive the movie.
Which is a choice.
Spoiler alert to those Pappy and Pippi fans who are waiting with bated breath.
So Pappy is telling a story about a lost love of his, whose name is very progressively Poontang. But because I guess the movie thought that was too risque, they cover it up with like engine noises every time they say the word poon.
Yeah, his funky old taxi cab backfires constantly.
And then a plane does later, a funky old plane. But I didn't find that joke very funny.
No, and I didn't even get that it was like a racist Asian name joke, because it turns out that's not a slang term. Like the reason they would censor it when he says it.
I always thought it was like a slang. I always heard it in like movies like Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, it's a slang for female genitalia as far as I understand it from my cultural exposure to it. But it turns out they're using it as the name.
Right, that's her name.
So that makes it really offensive when you finally put it all together in the end and you find out he's not saying, I got some poontang generically, but that I loved a girl named Poontang. I didn't even pick up on that.
And then her sister is named Poonani.
Yeah.
Which is also slang for vagina.
But then you have to see her and she's an old Asian woman and that's really bad.
Talk about a walk around the block for a shitty joke. I was saying about myself earlier, like this movie's outdoing me at every turn. So much effort for just, I can't, nobody's laughing at that.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird. Pappy did make me laugh though. He had one line when Jimmy goes, "Can you get me to Niagara Falls?" And Pappy goes, "Depends." And he goes, "On what?" He goes, "I'll need some if I drive that far."
Yeah. I mean,
that's so stupid, but it's pretty funny.
It's an old cliche joke, but it's done well. It was good.
The actor has a good delivery too. I do like that actor.
Yes.
I've seen him in other stuff. He's always playing like just a decrepit old man. I think he's been playing that role for like
49ers and ancient guys with the jutting chin. You absolutely know that actor.
He's got a real old prospector face. Yeah, so that's what I got for Act 2. Should we move on?
All right, let's try to get to Niagara Falls.
This movie's ridiculous.
The next morning, Jimmy is still not in Niagara Falls yet, and with the wedding looming, he stops at a payphone and tries to call Chloe. But her fiancé Mark picks up and tells Jimmy Chloe doesn't love him. Defeated, Jimmy gives up on love, and he calls Dr. Freak to take Dr. Freak up on his job offer. But Jimmy's parents overhear, and they come to his rescue. His mom wants to take him right home, but for the first time in his life, Jimmy's dad talks to him and convinces Jimmy to follow his dreams. Back on the road, Jimmy is picked up in a biplane by Pappy's brother Pippi. He then gets dropped directly into Niagara River and goes over the falls. But he survives and he drags himself into the chapel and halts the wedding just before Chloe says, "I do." In a show of true love, Jimmy steps out of his bubble suit, choosing to kiss Chloe one time, even if it means his death. But he doesn't die. And Jimmy's mom is forced to admit he developed immunities at age 4, but she kept it from him ever since. In the end, Jimmy and Chloe get married, and at their wedding reception, all his various pursuing factions come together in harmony. It even turns out that Jimmy's mom is actually Slim's old flame Wildflower, and so she and Slim and Mr. Livingston ride off happily together, 3 up on one big old motorcycle.
I guess this movie was progressive in its embrace of thruples as a concept.
That's true. It's a little bit forward thinking there. You got to give them one little point.
Are they a polycule or do you need to be 4 people for that?
Oh, I'm not the guy to answer that question.
Fair. So Jimmy somehow makes it from California to Niagara Falls, Southern California to Niagara Falls, which cannot be on more opposite ends of the country.
Yeah, it's a big trip.
I don't know how he does it, but whatever. They're not too concerned with the details.
On scooters and motorcycles and walking half the time.
If they're not concerned with the details, I guess neither am I. But yeah, you have a note here that that's such a good call out though, that when he's on the payphone, there are just Niagara brand spray starch on the shelves. I clocked that. I was like, they must be in Niagara.
It's the cheapest device because like we were saying, they show the outside of this little liquor store on the side of the road and it totally looks like the desert still, like we were talking about. And certainly like I'm no expert on Western New York, but I believe that you are, and you could probably tell me it does not look like that.
No, yeah. I lived in Buffalo, New York for over 3 years. Went to Niagara Falls 15 times.
Okay.
It does not look anything like that. Correct, you are. Good shout.
So, through the magic of movies, they stock this liquor store shelves with Niagara brand spray starch, which I actually have a can of. It's a quality spray starch if you like to starch your underpants when you iron them. And that sort of sells us on the fact that
you iron your underpants?
No.
I'm so confused.
Well, when I was wearing more button-up shirts, for a while I was like, I want the collar to stand up perfect. I want the front to not have any wrinkles. And I started using spray starch.
You don't want Derek Guy to see you with a floppy collar and just end your whole career.
That could be instant cancellation.
Yes, so it's clearly a national brand if you have it in LA, but they were like, we'll just put some Niagara starch on the shelves. That'll tell people.
That'll just remind you where we are.
They could have put like some Labatt Blue on the shelves, some Jenny Cream to drive home that they're in Western New York now.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Labatt Blue is a Canadian beer brand.
Oh, yeah, Labatt. I've drank Labatt when I've been in Ontario proper.
Yeah, we love Canada and don't want it to be part of the United States, for the record, or their own country.
No, yeah, I'll keep Labatt Blue, as I like to say. What's Jenny Cream? Is that what you said?
Yes, that is short for Genesee Cream Ale. Genesee Brewing is a brewing company in Genesee, New York, or at least it used to be. I think they're one of those like legacy brands that got bought up by a bigger brewer and now just like they stamp the name on stuff. And Jenny Cream was the college beer of Western New York.
Oh, cool.
Real like low cost, but weird that it's a cream ale because like usually when you're drinking 15 of a type of beer, you don't want lactose necessarily.
That's not such a college kid staple.
But no, people would pound cans of Jenny Cream for some reason.
Wow.
And it's not the worst beer I've ever had. Like I would put it a step above like a PBR, but it was like a very popular beer among young people in Western New York and still is as far as I know.
I guess they couldn't do regional beers because the beer was part of the joke. That was Chloe's favorite beer was called Orb, and it was like some kind of symbolism.
I'll be real with you. I didn't even notice that.
That was the other thing featured in that liquor store. Once I noticed the Niagara cans, I started looking at everything in there. It's a weird scene.
Also, like, why is Jimmy taking the fiance of his lover's word for it when he's like, oh yeah, she doesn't love you? Like, he didn't hear it from her. He didn't give him any specifics. He was just like, yeah, she doesn't like you.
Yeah.
And he's okay. I guess I'll just go be a freak.
Yeah, Jimmy has a few lines where he's painfully and unrealistically naive. Like when he first sees Mark, when he's getting ready to take Chloe to prom and he's being a total gross fucker. And he's like,
oh yeah, doing all the kind of pantomiming behind her back about like what he's going to do to her.
Yeah, a little sexual bullshit. And he's like, oh, Mark is so cool. And you're like, oh, this poor kid has got everything backwards. And so I think that's a flashback to that. But at this point, I feel like we've grown with Jimmy as a character and we expected him to be a little more real world savvy, but alas, no.
Right, like his experience should have wisened him up a little bit. But then we wouldn't get the daring entry via plane into the ceremony.
Yeah, that was tortuous.
Goes on for fucking ever.
He has to go over the falls and try to stop himself and then let himself go over as an act of, I don't know what that symbolized, giving in or trying, or why does going over the falls show that you're pursuing your dream? I don't know, but somehow it did. And then he drags himself into the chapel with this really extended, it's a classic scene where they keep cutting back and the priest, the officiant is going, and you, Mark, take her and like, come on, let's hurry it up. And what's that whole hurry up versus will the hero get there in time? A little torturous.
If I was a guest at that wedding, I'd be fucking furious. This lady took 17 minutes to walk down the aisle and then is like stalling during the ceremony.
Those scenes are so cliche that they're just like, you want them to speed it up or get it over with somehow.
Absolutely you do. But their first kiss is a nice moment and his kind of willing sacrifice, even though we've mostly surmised by that point that it's bullshit.
I wonder if I was thinking that when on my first watch, I suspected there would be a happily ever after. So I'm like, okay, he's not really dying, but I guess I didn't outright have it pegged that the mom was lying to him his whole life.
I guess to bring up our earlier qualm about how Mrs. Livingston doesn't really have any justification for her fear of the outside world. I guess it's the fact that like the immunities thing was true for a time is maybe the explanation that they were hoping, that he really didn't have any immunities for 4 years.
Right. Which I gave her a little break on that. And then on second watch, I realized that they say she brings him home from the hospital at age 4.
So they were like, he's fine, bring him home.
He's fine, take him home. And she's like, no, I'm taking him home, but he's not fine. I'm going to abuse him the rest of his life, which is pretty sick.
Yeah, she's an insane person and should be in jail probably.
It's pretty fucked. But she gets to go off on the motorcycle throuple, like you said. And as much as I was tired and creeped out and offended by all the various sets of people that were introduced during the course of the film, especially the middle of Act 2, they bring them all together in Act 3. And I was like, God dang it, I'm falling for it. I'm like smiling to see them partying together and happy at the wedding because I'm like, oh, I know that guy. Hey, that's the stupid biker guy. And that's It's the mud wrestling host.
And what does he give them for a wedding gift?
$500.
$500?
$500.
And they do it again briefly. And even Chloe gets in on it a little bit.
Yeah.
It made me smile again.
That made me smile again. The whole thing made me smile again. John Carroll Lynch is redeemed because he has that scene where he gets to be a good guy and tell his son to follow his dreams, which was nice for a character that was annoying. And then he's back to not talking in the final scene. But when they pan over and you see he's the third guy on the motorcycle and he gives this kind of saucy wink or nod before he pulls away, I'm like, okay, that was funny.
He's a bit of a cuck in this situation, isn't he?
I don't know. He got to drive, so they gave him like a little bit of dignity.
He's got some agency, yeah.
Yeah, they sandwiched Slim in the middle, so I don't know what that means.
I called you a cuck, John Carroll Lynch. I did not mean it. Yeah, man, what a strange movie. Strange in every sense. Like, the plot itself is strange, but also just the way it's made. As much as we did give it some grace, I will say I'm not shocked that I've never heard much about Blair Hayes after this.
In some ways, it accomplishes a lot because it's a very complex plot. So between the writers and the director, they pulled it off. They stitched it all together. And like you pointed out, it feels like, why did they even try so hard? Why did they tie all those characters in so thoroughly?
Right. Why did they complicate the story so much?
And so this kind of like, you appreciate their effort to go, oh, we're going to make this crazy madcap movie where all these zany storylines weave together and every group has a reason to be mad at the other group. And then we're going to bring it all together in the end. There's something off about it because at the same time, it's an American Pie cash grab, Randy movie, Hollywood play.
Weirdly sexless for that too. It has the crude humor, but none of the sexiness or nudity or like,
that's true.
Even raunchiness. Like, it's not an R-rated movie. It's PG-13. So there's not a lot of profanity. There's no nudity. So that's
true.
It's half-assing two things. But I think you gave a good note off mic about what kind of movie it really is at its heart, which is those kind of road odysseys.
It's some combination of that American Pie teen sex romp with this thing that's, to me, reflects these older set of movies like Cannonball Run. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, even, which I think is like 1969, which is like cross-country mayhem with huge casts and wild shit happening. So somebody clearly liked that stuff and was like, let's try to do that. And we're sitting here going, why'd you bother?
But yeah, why'd you do that with this? Like, why is that the direction you went in? Sounds like a great idea for a totally different movie. Maybe you should have made that one. Do you want to hear what happened to the people involved?
Yeah, I gotta know.
So not much happened with Blair Hayes, so much so that I strongly suspected that was one of those director pseudonyms that they use when they hate a movie so much.
Oh, you accused him of being Alan Smithy, but he's not. It's a real person.
No, he's a real person. He was quite busy in the 2010s, but it was making nothing anyone's ever heard of. And then he stopped working in 2019. No idea what he's up to. Does not have much of an online footprint. I think the more interesting case study here, though, is our boy Paul Five and Ken Daurio, who this was their debut, as we mentioned. Then they would write the Santa Claus 2, the Tim Allen movie after this. And then they would go on to almost exclusively work on animated films. So they did Horton Hears a Who, Despicable Me 1, 2, and 3, Hop, The Lorax, and The Secret Life of Pets were all co-written by the two of them. So they're probably raking it in doing those kind of high-profile animated stuff that's making hundreds of millions.
Yeah, that's a lot higher quality stuff than this movie. So they went a long way in their careers.
But then something interesting happened. They co-created the show Schmigadoon. I don't know if you remember that one. It was on Apple TV. It was a musical show. Keegan-Michael Key, your boy.
I've heard of it, but I never watched.
Cecily Strong, I think, was the co-lead. I never watched it either, but I remember when it was coming out. But Daurio left the duo before writing for that show started. So they came up with the concept together and I think had a hand in casting it. But Daurio was becoming uncomfortable with the more adult humor in the series, as he's still a member of the LDS Church. Was not like a former member. They have not worked together since then, but they maintain that they have a good friendship still and they hang out. I think they have one of them has a podcast, or they both have a podcast together. But Paul was doing Schmigadoon while Daurio wrote Despicable Me 4 solo. So he's carrying the torch of the animated writing. Looks like Paul is going into more like show running.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
They haven't slowed down. This movie was...
No, if anything, they've ramped up. Yeah.
Yeah. They're still going strong 25 years later. Good for them. It's impressive.
Yeah. We talked about Gyllenhaal not too long ago, so I won't dwell on it too much. But I was surprised to find out he'd been acting since 91 with City Slickers. That was his debut.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, as a kid. He's not that old.
He must have been tiny in that. Yeah, I don't remember him in that.
And then October Sky, which, stay tuned. And then there was Donnie Darko. He'd follow up Donnie Darko with a lot of movies I'd never heard of. And then he had his big budget leading man role in 2004's The Day After Tomorrow, also with Dennis Quaid, I think in a big role in that one.
Okay.
That was Roland Emmerich, I believe. If it wasn't, it feels like it should have been. And then the year 2005 made him like a believable adult leading man, because that's when he did Brokeback Mountain and Jarhead.
Oh, okay.
Now I'd say he's one of our most reliable leading men. We love Jake. We love seeing him and stuff.
Yeah. I don't know, he's a guy that people like to hate. I'm not sure why, but I have felt that way early in his career, maybe when I wasn't really watching his movies, but just seeing him as a celebrity. But I don't know, I tend to always like his performances when I actually dig in.
I feel like people dislike him for the same reason they dislike Anne Hathaway. It's like there's a level of like hyper competence with the way they approach their job, which is acting. That I guess could be seen as try-hardy, but I like my actors to try hard because then they do better jobs.
No, I think you're onto something. There's some vibe that you pick up from him, but the thing is, he turns in good performances, so I appreciate him.
We appreciate you, Jake. Come on the show. Swoosie Kurtz, she's been acting since the 70s, and she's already got the ET from the EGOT, so she only needs a go.
Oh, nice.
She got the Emmy and the Tony. She's still working to this day. She's doing voice work on the rebooted Rugrats series. Some of her other noteworthy credits are Dangerous Liaisons, Liar Liar. So she worked with the real Jim Carrey, not just the discount Jim Carrey from this movie.
Nice. Good for her.
Cruel Intentions, Rules of Attraction, and Lost, which I mentioned. She plays John Locke's mom.
Oh, okay. Can I give my Swoosie Kurtz tidbit that I looked up when I was trying to figure out how to pronounce her name?
Please do. It's a fun one.
So I had seen her name over the years, and I was like, is it Swoosie? Is it Swoosie? And apparently, her dad she claimed the most decorated pilot in World War II. That seems like a big claim, but he was a very decorated World War II pilot, and his plane was named the Swoose, and it had a bird painted on the side of it that was a combination of a swan and a goose, and he named his daughter Swoose.
Was it made out of spruce?
No, it was fine American steel that repelled the Nazi flak that was thrown at it and survived a bunch of missions. But interesting, the Swoose, she's like, it's a kind of an embarrassing name to have, but it's a pretty cool story.
It is a cool story. If it's true, that does feel like a little bit of embellishment.
Maybe she has a real name, but they like to call her Swoose. I don't know.
Very cool tidbit regardless.
Yeah.
When you said you had a Swoosie Kurtz tidbit, I'd forgotten about that one for a second. I was like, does Ian know Swoosie Kurtz somehow?
No.
After I just shit on her character for an hour and a half.
Not the real kind of tidbit, just the kind that you Google online.
Oh, okay. And then we don't have to spend too much time on Marley Shelton because we didn't really talk about it. We just covered her in October because she's the co-lead of Valentine.
Which we liked her in too.
Very charming. Yeah, she's great. She was famously Wendy Peppercorn in The Sandlot.
Okay.
Wendy Peppercorn.
Never saw The Sandlot.
What the fuck, Ian? Come on, man.
But here's a real Ian tidbit. I almost ran over the redheaded guy who says, "You're killing me, Smalls." I almost killed him.
The Great Hambino?
I might have given this tidbit on the pod before, but he lives in my neighborhood. And
oh, he does?
One time he was walking by as I was pulling out of my back alley, and I had to stop short because he almost stepped in front of my bumper.
Did he give you any flack about it?
He said, "You're killing me, Smalls."
You've never seen the movie, but you know the line, at least.
I had heard the line.
He's also the originator of the "You Play Ball Like a Girl" line.
Oh, okay.
Which is one of the signature moments from the movie. It's a great movie. So here's a little tidbit about me. I'm doing a camp out with my son through Boy Scouts, or just Scouts. They just call it Scouts now because girls can join too. Where we're camping out at a minor league baseball field. First we watch a game, then we camp out and watch a movie. And so I've been trying to guess what the movie's going to be. My money's on The Sandlot.
That's a great guess and a really cool event. Sounds super neat.
I know. I'm excited. I've always heard about these things happening, but I've never been able to go to one. So now I'm living vicariously.
But I hope you're waiting till it's more summery weather.
Yes, this is happening in August.
Okay. Camping in March sounds a little harsh.
Yeah, no thank you. And then I think we mentioned it already, but she's currently starring as Emma Dutton in 1923. If you want more information about her career, go listen to our fucking Valentine episode, you heathens.
Yeah.
Philistines.
Now that we've seen 2 of Marley Shelton's movies, you and I were both like, why aren't there more? Why didn't she take off as one of the big leading women of that generation? But we're happy to have the movies that we have.
Yeah, she's very charming. I think she's a lot of fun to watch, but who knows? She's still working. It's not like she didn't have a career. It's just maybe not to the level that we think was warranted.
Could have been bigger even.
Ian, do you want to hear what we're covering next time?
Yes, we were sort of juggling ideas. We want to bounce back from this movie, which movies like this can tend to put us in a funk. So you got something good for us?
Yeah, we were going to follow this up with another downer of a movie for very different reasons, but we're going to push that back one episode and we're going to do a movie that we've been waiting to do for a long time that has actually been one of our highly requested ones for a while. And that's going to be the Carl Urban DREDD movie.
Nice.
He's playing the old judge, not the Sylvester Stallone one, because I think that made money somehow, even though it's far worse than the Carl Urban one. Yeah, this is a movie that fucking rules. I feel like this episode is going to be us being like, wasn't that cool? Like, yeah. All right, next thing.
That's great. We could use that. A movie that we don't dread watching, you could say.
Hey-o. That's wordplay, folks. And with that, we're going to get out of here. Please remember Remember to rate, review, supply to the podcast. That's what I was about to say. That's not a sentence. That makes sense.
Supply us with your love. That's all we require.
And like your subscriptions and likes and follows.
And we like that too.
You can still follow us on Twitter for now at BlastZonePod and Blue Sky as well, or shoot us an email, blastzonepod@gmail.com, if you have any questions, feedback, episode suggestions, just want to chat movies with us.
Hit us up.
We'll be happy to hear from you, and we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.